Today's program was recorded prior to Tuesday's presidential debate. Hey everyone, and welcome to the FLATLINING Podcast from Fulcrum Strategies. I'm Matthew Handley, and with me is our president and CEO and economist Ron Howergan. Ron, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We took a few weeks off for the summer, but we are back, and we're going to be keeping you connected to some of the healthcare issues that matter most to you. And Ron, we want to talk a little bit about payer issues today. There's some headlines that have come across Becker's payer issues and some other websites as well that I want to talk about, including a possible sale of BlueCross BlueShield of Louisiana. Now, the new CEO, Brian Kammerlink, told Business Report on August 29th that a sale to Elevance is totally off the table. I want to start by reminding listeners how the kind of the Blue Cross system works, because it's different in different states, and some of them are nonprofits, some of them are for-profits. And what might that look like if Blue Cross Louisiana were to sell to the parent organization, Elevance Health?
Yeah, so like you said, Blue Cross Blue Shield operates licenses in a number of states. And so the association licenses the name and the marketing ability to call yourself Blue Cross Blue Shield. Louisiana is currently a nonprofit state entity. Selling to Elevance would do two things. One, they would have to convert to for-profit, which requires state approval, Department of Insurance, state, et cetera, approval, and then they could go ahead and sell to Elevance. You know, this transaction is largely broken up by the fact that they probably would have had a very difficult time getting the state to do that. Mm-hmm. Many years ago, there was this rash of doing it. It's how Anthem kind of created itself and then became Elevance. And North Carolina at one point tried to do that. The Blue Cross North Carolina tried to convert, and it was blocked. There were a number of physicians who said this would be bad. The state realized they were not going to allow it. They had to pull back away from it. And that's really what was going on here. I think they wanted to sell, and I think they realized that there's no way they could have gotten through the state. And now they're coming out and saying, oh, no, we want to stay independent. The other thing that's important to understand here is, you know, he said, we want to try to stay as independent as long as we can, almost like, you know, they were looking at a sale because they're not doing well financially, mm-hmm. which I find incredibly humorous because Louisiana is the second least competitive health insurance market state in the country, only behind Alabama. So if you can't make money as the Blue Cross Blue Shield entity in Louisiana with almost no competition, something is seriously wrong. This was not about them needing a sale to be able to make more money. I think it was more about a sale so that their CEO or the executives could make huge profit bonuses, et cetera.
So tell me a little bit about how they determine whether or not a market, you know, to take Alabama, well, I shouldn't say market, a state like Alabama or Louisiana, and how they determine whether or not it's a competitive market for insurance companies.
Yeah, there's this economic formula, and I won't go into the formula because only geeks like me find it interesting, where you take a market and you develop a score. It's called the HH index. And the level of that score will give it a sense of how concentrated or uncompetitive it is. Okay. Anything of the scores are from 0, which would be fully competitive, to 10,000, which is very uncompetitive. It's a monopoly. Okay. Anything above a score of 2,500 is considered a problem. That's considered highly concentrated, which means it is at risk of being broken up by the Federal Trade Commission for being, you know, monopolistic. Louisiana's score is 5,300. It's twice the score you need to be considered highly concentrated. Again, Alabama's is 7,400. Louisiana is second in the country. Now, the only reason why it doesn't get broken up is because it's health insurance, and it's sort of allowed to be pretty anti-competitive. But a score of 5,300 in almost any other industry would create significant problems.
if I recall, the American Medical Association published something a couple of years ago looking at a lot of the markets in the U.S. and it wasn't the bottom line report on that many of the states, it was in that problematic range. It was above that 2,500 score.
More than half.
More than half.
The majority of states are considered highly concentrated, and they're becoming more and more concentrated over time. And the top 10 were something they published. Like I said, Louisiana was number 2. Mm-hmm. So, it's not that Blue Cross Blue Shield Louisiana isn't making money. It's not that they're financially healthy. They could almost charge whatever they wanted to, which is what monopolies can do. The thing, and a lot of times why nonprofit Blue Cross plans want to convert is there are significant limits on what they can make. They can't get stock options. They can't get those kind of very lucrative stock plans because they're nonprofit. And so this is a way for them to make significantly more money as the CEO and executive team.
One final thing on this, the CEO there, Brian Camerlink, who was hired after the deal was scrapped, he's the one that said that they were not planning a sale. What he did mention is that they want to shift into more Medicaid, Medicare, and self-funded insurance. I would imagine that's because those are probably the big money makers for a company like Blue Cross Blue Shield of Louisiana.
Yeah, I mean, Medicaid and Medicare are the most profitable plans as far as profit per enrollee. On average, Medicaid is twice the profit load as commercial insurance, and self-funded is no risk because the actual risk for the claims expense hits the employer group. So, yeah, it's like a company saying, I want to do the products that bring me the most profit and the least risk. Well, that's that doesn't take a Wharton MBA to say you should focus on those things.
Right.
But that's why he's focusing on there, Medicare, Medicaid, and self-funded.
I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about some recent stories about payers being fined by the state that they are operating in. I don't necessarily want to talk about all of these, Ron. I want to highlight a few of them because some of them are what you would expect from some of the payers. Anthem of Virginia had to pay money because they improperly denied claims and paid providers incorrectly. Anthem of California was fined for failing to reimburse providers in a timely manner. One of the ones that interested me the most was a story out of Texas, where Cigna was fined $600,000 for failing to comply with multiple independent claims dispute resolution requirements under the state law. And obviously, this is an instance where they have a state No Surprises Act in Texas, and it does differ from the federal No Surprises Act. And so I want to start a little bit there and ask you how, and you don't have to speak specifically about Texas, but what marks the difference between the state No Surprises acts and the federal No Surprises Act?
Well, the first thing is understand the federal No Surprises Act will never supersede a state law. This is part of that states' rights versus federal rights. What the federal NSA said was where there isn't a state law that governs fully insured business, because the state can't govern self-insured. Where there isn't one, then the federal law applies. If you have a state law, it applies. And then the federal law only applies for the self-funded stuff. Okay, so Texas is one of several states that has a state law. So for anything that is fully insured, you follow that law. Now, the laws in states are slightly different, but they do roughly the same thing, which is the patient can't be balance billed. They're taken out of the middle. And then there is some sort of external process for determining a dispute. And the federal law, it's called IDR. State laws have a very similar process. You go to some sort of an arbitrator. They say, hey, here's the winner, here's the loser. And whether it's the federal law or the state law, they come out and say, in this case, Cigna, you lost. You have to pay this provider X dollars. And what happened is Cigna didn't. They didn't comply with that requirement. Either they didn't do it fast enough or they didn't do it at all, and they got fined $600,000 by the Texas Department of Insurance. That's the fine. That's not how much money they had to pay out for these awards. That's just your slap on the wrist for, hey, cut it out.
Yeah,
you're violating state law. The thing that's interesting about this is there's only a few states that have these laws, and it only covers a small portion of the enrollees. And yet we've seen some fines like this under these state laws, and we've seen zero fines under the federal law because the federal government is choosing not to enforce those things. We know that there have been problems under the federal law of of companies adhering to either on a timely basis or the actual ruling, but the federal government has chosen not to fine anybody.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what impact, if any, this might have on federal enforcement, but it sounds like basically none.
It doesn't. It's very similar to having something happen in a state court, which really doesn't, apply to federal court. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I think is interesting from these is not that it was easy to find 9 different fines, not that it was easy to find 9 fines that total more than $4 million of fines. Mm-hmm. Only over a few months. This isn't over the last 5 years. This is just the last few months.
Yep.
Is that what other industry is it so easy to find companies being fined by state or federal government entities for failing to do what is their basic function? Processing claims, providing benefits. I mean, this is what their whole job is. And it's so easy to find all this. What other industry will you have that? I mean, you don't see the auto industry getting fined every other month for failing to produce a car that runs.
Right.
And yet this doesn't seem surprising to anybody. And $4 million is not even a rounding error for these companies. So it's really not a deterrent. It's the cost of doing business. This is a little bit like, giving Jeff Bezos a parking ticket. Yeah. He's going to wad it up, throw it away, and go, whatever. That's the other disturbing part for me, is that how prevalent this is and how little it actually does to deter anything.
I was going to say that $600,000 fine by Texas for Cigna. And you're absolutely right. It's nothing for Cigna. It's the cost of doing business in the state there. I did want to pick your brain about one other of these that I thought was just uniquely interesting, and that was United Healthcare being fined $546,500 by the state of Utah back in May for selling unapproved health plans to state residents. And I wonder how that even ends up being possible at the payer level, that they're selling a plan that hasn't been approved by state regulators.
Well, I will say this, and not to defend the plans, but and I have personal experience with, when I worked at the payers, of fines from the state that you just scratched your head and go, I don't understand. Let me give you an example. When I worked for Cigna in North Carolina, we had a regularly scheduled DOI audit. They come every few years. They do what's called a market conduct audit. And we got fined $50,000 for false advertising. Okay. Now, the plan was officially named Cigna Healthcare of North Carolina. And what we got fined for was, on our building, we had a sign that said Cigna. And they called that false advertising. And we argued that, no, Cigna owns the building. They're advertising their company. We're not advertising a insurance product.
Right.
And we lost the argument, because you don't win the argument at Department of Insurance. So, I thought that was a ridiculous fine. Now, I don't know the details behind this thing of selling the plans. It could be clearly that they were doing something very wrong. It could be that somebody thought they had the right stamp on the right approval and didn't. It could be something really bizarre that United went, I don't know, whatever. So, a lot of these fines, I would say probably the vast majority of them are well earned, and they were doing bad things. But there are times when you just get something from a Department of Insurance. You go, really? Is that what the problem is? So.
Let me ask you this, only because I'm curious. What was the solution to fixing the Cigna problem in North Carolina? Did you have to take the name off the building, or put a new sign up, or what was the solution?
That was the other thing. Was it wasn't what was called an ongoing market conduct problem. So once we paid the fine, the sign could be up there. It was a one and done kind of thing. So that was the other thing that was ridiculous, was if they were truly worried that we were confusing consumers by advertising, they would have made us take it down. And they were like, oh no, it's a one and done. You pay the fine, and go, okay, I don't get that.
Yeah,
that's state regulators for you.
That is, state regulators, they're from the government and they're here to help, something like that.
That's right.
I want to end on what people might consider a kind of a good news item coming from one of the payers. We hear a lot about providers, oftentimes in hospitals in particular, offering charity care to those who are not able to pay for their health care. We hear a lot about providers writing off a lot of the accounts receivables that they have, because they know that some portion of their population is not going to be able to pay. And we know that medical debt's an issue at the federal level, as we hear from at least one major party candidate talking about eliminating medical debt. There's a health plan in Michigan, Priority Health, which is one of the subsidiaries of it used to be called Spectrum Hospital System, and now it's merged with another one. It's Corewell Health. They're offering free visits with virtual providers through telehealth to uninsured Michigan adults. And right now they're estimating there's about 400,000 people in Michigan that don't have insurance. And so I'm curious, Ron, what your take on this might be. Is this an instance of a payer doing something right?
Well, I think this is an instance of a payer/provider doing something right. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think there's an important thing here where you understand why this isn't something that's being offered by Cigna or Aetna or even BlueCross BlueShield of Michigan. Mm-hmm. Okay. Priority Health, because it's not only a payer and a provider, has a different look at this. If these people didn't get free virtual care, there's a chance that some portion of them are going to end up in the ER. That ER is a hospital that's run and staffed by the sort of the parent company of Priority Health. It's a hospital system.
Yep.
Where they are going to get zero money and a very expensive use of resources. So when you think about it in total, and patients actually benefit from this. I'm not casting dispersions on their rationale or reasoning. Heck, I can offer free virtual care. That's going to cost me some amount of money. And if that avoids some of these people getting to an ER, then I avoid all that uncompensated care. Now, it's also good for the people because maybe they can do a virtual care and get some care before it exasperates all the way to needing an emergency room. But it's a point where their financial interest to try to avoid all that uncompensated care actually marries up with the greater good for the people.
Right.
It does create an interesting scenario to say, well, look, if the state and the federal government are funding these, uncompensated care through Medicaid or whatever, shouldn't there be some way to try to get this type of very efficient healthcare directly to people without insurance or people who are underinsured? Maybe this should be something as a bigger. Now, you got to be careful because you can't turn this into, anytime I have a sniffle, I get on my cell phone and get a prescription. But it does point out that there are more efficient ways to provide care than loading up our ERs.
Mm-hmm. And I do know that, and I just do point out from some of the other stuff in this press release that this is only going to be available through the end of the year, and that it doesn't include the cost of any prescribed prescriptions or any follow-up care that may be required. But I just thought it was an interesting way to take a look at it. And I do know that already, anecdotally, living here in Michigan, Priority has at least an odor of being a little bit more community oriented, in part because of its affiliation with the hospital system, and that it's not one of the big, Cigna's, Blue Crosses of the world. And I just came across this. I thought, this might be an instance of something going right. And we so often we do talk quite critically of the payers, and I think rightfully so, because some of them. I can think of some people. It's well earned. I can think of some sleazy people that I've had to talk to this week, or at some of these organizations. And this is an instance where this might be. I think I like what you said. This might be a good example to show both the federal and state governments about what there's some way we could fix parts of the Medicare and Medicaid system in an efficient manner.
Yeah, and I mean, and I don't want to take this sort of too far down the road, but one of the things that telehealth could do is start to catch things pretty early. And then if there are avenues, whether they are, already available public assistance, or you've got somebody who is uninsured just because they haven't, they don't know how to apply for Medicaid or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
While you're in that telehealth visit, say, hey, why don't you contact this person, or this care manager will help you get enrolled in that. Let's deal with this situation before it becomes something that you're going to end up in the hospital that we're all going to pay for. So, it's nice to operate first two stories that make you a little uncomfortable about the insurance industry, and one that goes, hey, maybe, I don't know if it's a blind squirrel finding a nut or if this was really that intentional, but I'll take the good news wherever I can get it.
Well, and I would love to do it more, but Ron, as you know in this business better than I do, it's some of these kinds of stories are few and far between on the payer side.
Unfortunately, yes.
That's going to wrap it up for what we have today. Ron, thanks for sitting down with me and talking healthcare again.
Thank you.